I had no brothers. I was a very patriotic kid, and my cousins were all in different branches of the service. And I was working at the time. I had to do something for my country. I was only a teenager. I had been to college, and I quit college because I wanted to go into service and help my country during World War II, which was a righteous war. We were attacked, and it was a horror. And so I wanted to. I was only about 18, and working at Sperry's out in Brooklyn someplace. We lived in the Bronx. And I had to travel. Oh, my goodness, I'd get up like 4 o'clock in the morning to travel way out there. And I had a job there, and I went down to New York. I said, I looked at all the different services. I had cousins in the Army, Coast Guard, Merchant Marine, boy cousins. I had no brothers. And I said, I was very patriotic, and I still am. Love my country. The Marine Corps looks really snazzy to me. It looks like they're doing a great job. They're just tough people. And so I went down to New York to where the recruitment office was, and they said, "How old are you?" I said, "I'm 18." And they said, "You have to be 20 with parents' consent. You're a female, and you will be stationed in the United States. The only place that we might send women would be to the Philippines, but the job that you have at Sperry's, you would have to be unfrozen from, because that's a defense industry." I was working on the Norden bomb site at the time at Sperry's. So I said, "Okay, then I'll get another job. I'll quit my job." He said, "Okay, you still have to be 20 years old with parents' consent." So I stayed at Sperry's for a little while, and we were doing all kinds of overtime, so I was making, for those days, fairly good money, which we needed. I mean, we were a lower middle class family in the Bronx, and so it was great money for me. My goodness. And so I stayed a little while, and then I quit, and I went to work for McCrory's in the Bronx. That was like a 5 and dime store, and I was working there for a while, so I was unfreezing myself. They said you had to be unfrozen for a minimum of 6 months from your defense work. And I worked for another store and so forth, and I got to be 20. I made it. And I got my parents' consent. Dad was gung-ho for it. Mom was not. She was worried. She was worried very much. And I said, "No, Mom, I'm not going overseas. Even if it would be voluntary if I were to go to the Philippines." I said, "I will not sign up for anything like that." So I wanted to go into the Marine Corps. My original question was because I wanted to do something for my country. And the slogan of the Marine Corps at that time was, "Release a man for active duty." I said, "That's wonderful. I will do that." So I enlisted. And in, I guess it was April of 1944, that I was told to report to Penn Station, or was that where it was? We took the train. And it was crowded with men and women, all enlistees, because as I said before, there was no draft for the Marine Corps in those days. And I was taken to Camp Lejeune with some other women who had enlisted, and mostly men, of course. And that is the answer to that question. I wanted to help my country, and I wanted to release a man for active duty because that is what they wanted us for. We would take over whatever job on the base, on whatever base we were stationed at. We were taken to Camp Lejeune for our basic training, which was boot camp. And it was between 10 and 12 weeks for us. The men had 12 weeks at that time. I think we had 10 or so, but it was very, very hard, very difficult. I was a strong kid, and I was fairly athletic. I rode horses, and, my dad was into baseball, so he put me on a baseball field. I played second base badly. We went bowling. I wasn't very good. I was never good at any of that stuff, but I always did it because it was kind of fun. And I was very close with, I was Daddy's little girl. And Mom, too, of course. But Daddy was the athlete of the family. He was a tremendous athlete. and he was good at everything. So we went to Camp Lejeune, and they immediately sent us to quartermaster, where they gave us uniforms, none of which fitted. We were a bunch of sad sack-looking women. The raincoats were too long, everything was not our size, and I was a slim person to begin with. And they didn't have regular shoes for us, but we had men's high tops, which were very comfortable, and they found a very small pair for me because I have very small feet. And we took our clothes home to the base, and we were assigned bunks and whatnot. And that was the beginning of my career as a Marine to help on my country. So after we were indoctrinated, as it were, shown the base, it was a beautiful base, they had a hospital there, and we were given, of course, our uniforms, and then within a couple of days, of course, before we went, we had to have medical, and we had to have shots and all kinds of things like that, which was fine, that was okay. We were taken to, I personally was assigned to, not at that time, but I was assigned to my bunk and whatever, and we started to go through training. And we were assigned a drill instructor. Funny experiences, one which I think will make you laugh. We had a mascot. Every Marine base had an English Bulldog mascot. They were dumb as dirt, but they taught them to march. When the big shots came from Washington to our base to, look at it, see that we were doing the right thing or whatever, they always had a parade for them in the parade grounds, and we were invited to watch. And they had trick marchers. Unfortunately, our base was not integrated. They had black people, African-American people who were Marines, but their jobs were to kind of polish the shoes of the officers, and they learned trick marching because of this idiotic thing that they all had rhythm, this idiotic nonsense, which I never was brought up that way. And I had no idea. I didn't know. I didn't even know that there were black Marines on the station because I never saw them. The only time I ever saw them was in these marching things when they had parades. So we were invited to sit in the bleachers, as it were, at the parade grounds. We had several. And I guess his name was Pal or something. The dog, who was a sergeant and had dress blue uniform with the gold trim on it, would march with them. That's the only thing he knew how to do. He was a dopey dog. It was a beautiful, beautiful specimen. And he lived with Colonel Noon at his house. So the dog would march along, and everybody enjoyed that. Every Marine base had a mascot, and it was always a bulldog. Tough, they were mushers. They were not tough dogs. You could do anything with them. Well, one day, I had a call. They said, you had to bring your Jeep out to the boondocks someplace because Pal had gotten loose from Colonel Noon's house, which had a fence around. It was nice. He had a beautiful house far from where our barracks were. And he said, Pal got loose, and he seemed to have killed a skunk. So he came back to the house. He was outside the house, near the house, not too far from the house, but, within driving distance, I'll say, of the house. And they had about 5 or 6 SPs who were Navy. Our shore police were not Marines. They were big, tough shore police, and they were Navy men, and they were in their uniforms. They were always in great uniforms because they opened doors for the colonel, and they did things, they were shore police. In the middle of a crowd of shore police, about 5 or 6 of these big, handsome Navy guys, lovely-looking men, was Pal. I think his name was Pal. I'm not going to swear to it. I don't remember. I seem to that rings a bell. Was Pal, growling and snapping. He was sick. He had either killed and eaten some part of that animal it was a skunk. and they couldn't get near him. So Colonel Noon called for me to bring my Jeep and see if I could do something with that dog. So I parked the Jeep a little distance away, and I started walking, and they said, "Don't go near him. He's crazy." And they'd put a hand out and he'd snap, and the guys, naturally, they weren't going to try and grab this dog. And the smell was emanating from, and skunk smell, you know. So I said, well, Colonel told me to do something with him because he has to go to a vet. So the Colonel wants him brought home. And I said, I'll have to get him in the Jeep somehow and get him to the Colonel. I can't disobey the Colonel's orders. So they said, what are you going to do? I said, I don't know, I'll see. So I started walking slowly toward this group, and when I got within hearing distance of the dog, I said to him, "Come on, Booby, come on, baby, come to me, come to mommy," like that. I was a kid, but I always had dogs, I mean, and horses and whatever, you know, animals I love. So I'm talking baby talk to this dog. "Come on, Booby," like that. And he trots out. They made a space for him, the five, whatever they were, the guys. I think they were 4, come to think of it. They made a space, and he came over, and I said, okay. And I said, oh, the odor. And he jumped into the Jeep in the front seat. I had occasion, I was called one day to take a Rio 5-ton steak truck. It was like a fence on the back of this great big truck that rattled when you drove. They said, go out to, it was out in the boondocks again. It was almost quitting time for the civilian employees. Pick them up and bring them to the gate so that they can go home. It's their quitting time. Go pick up the civilian employees. There's about 10 of them. I said, okay, I don't say no, it's orders, you know, there's orders. Go out and pick them up in take the Rio 5-ton steak. I had never driven it before. I said, okay. It wasn't hard to drive, except that it was noisy. It rattled. It had the stakes all around. So I went out and I found the men. They were nasty. They were very nasty. They really were. They did not like us, even though they would have been unemployed if the base wasn't there. And they were making cracks in the back of the truck there. And I said, I'll fix them. We had a train station at that time, which later on they discontinued. We called it the Tunaville Trolley. It went from one small area to another. We had a little train station on the base. They discarded it after I was there a year or so. But you had to go over the tracks, and that train did come. And it was really for civilians and for people visiting or for Marines going someplace. It took you to some town, and it came back to the base. It was a very small station. And the tracks ended right on the station. But you had to go over the tracks to get to where I wanted to go, to get them to the gate so they could get out of the base. I knew the train was stopped all the way down at the end. So I drove very slowly until the train started. When the train started, I knew it was going to stop right by where I was. I knew that it wasn't going to run over my truck. And I said, uh-oh, I'm stuck. I rode on the tracks. I rode the truck onto the tracks, and I stopped. And I said, oh, I'm stuck. You guys better get out. The train's coming. I yelled it back to them. And you'd see men jumping off the truck and running across the tracks. And then, of course, when they all got off, I started the truck again, and I got over the tracks, of course.